Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Round Robin. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with Christine Mulligan, Nina Mulligan, Regina Lindsay, Angela Sinclair, and of course, my husband, Todd Preston. Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, everybody.
So on today's episode, we are actually going to be talking about a documentary that was a suggestion by Regina. So thank you, Regina. I loved it. And the documentary is on Netflix, and it's called Unlocked. Now, this is a documentary about an Arkansas jail, which is called the Pulaski County Detention Facility, and this is in Little Rock, Arkansas. And from what I got out of it, now it says a detention center, guys, so correct me if I'm wrong. To me, it kind of seems like it's a holding place.
Yeah, it's the county lockup. So a lot of the inmates that are there, a lot of the prisoners are either pending sentencing. Some of them are serving their sentences in the county jail, but a lot of them are either awaiting trial or awaiting sentencing to go to the state penitentiary.
Got it. Yep. And the cool thing about this, so this jail in Little Rock is run by Sheriff Eric Higgins, and the violence in the jails and in the prisons is out of control. And this guy, Eric, was looking into how our European countries jail their criminals. And it's completely different. I mean, they're not locked up in a cell. I mean, they have a room. But I remember seeing a show on some of these other countries, how they run it. And like, they have desks and they have plants and they have freedom. And it seems to be, somewhat smooth sailing for these guys. Now, granted, I'm sure there's issues or whatever. But the current situation in most prisons is that these people who've committed crimes are in the cell for what they call 23 and 1. 23 hours locked up in their cell and 1 hour out. And that 1 hour out will include getting your showers, getting some exercise, eating dinner maybe. I don't know what time they get out, but it was pretty crazy. But this guy had a radical idea, approached, this particular block. I think it was H-Pod. They called them pods. Do I have that right? H-Pod, guys?
Yep.
Yep. So, he had them all come out of their cells, kind of sitting around, and kind of announced, we're going to give this a try. It's an experiment. And I think it went for 6 weeks. And the experiment was that the guards were not going to be within the pod, monitoring, watching, listening. They were actually going to exit the pod, lock the doors, but unlock the cell doors. And so looking around at people when, he's telling them this, their eyes were real wide. They're looking around like, what? Seriously? Is this guy joking? But he wasn't joking. And, of course, when it first started, things were a little rambunctious, but things seemed to work out. So I just kind of want to hear your guys' take on it, maybe talk a little bit more about it instead of me telling all about what happened so that we're all kind of pitching in. So, Regina, since you're the one who threw this out there as a topic for us to talk about, you want to go up next?
Sure. So I think a couple of things. One of the things that intrigued me the most about it, I guess, when I started watching it, is that I am a documentary junkie too, and I'd already watched a lot of documentaries about prisons in other countries and how they house and rehabilitate prisoners, in particular countries that don't have the death penalty, and in particular countries where even capital offenders who are convicted of murder, they're not in there for life. They're not in there for anything like life a lot of times. And how, even though they're confined to a prison area, they're not confined to their cells the way that prisoners are in the United States. And, there's this, I don't know, sort of, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because as a law-abiding member of society, we sit here in our living rooms and watch these things, and your first instinct is this is supposed to be punishment. It's not supposed to be the country club. And I think that that's the mentality of a lot of people. And to some degree, that's true. There should be recompense for their crimes. However, if in these cases where people are not convicted of or sentenced to a life sentence, they're acquitted later on, whatever, they at some point will be reintegrated into society. And so until they participated in this experiment, I feel like a lot of them had this mindset about, I'm going to do me and you do you. And I don't care how my actions affect the rest of the group. But then as this experiment went on, they realized that one of them in particular that was making hooch and having contraband and all these kinds of things, when they ended up shaking down the cells at one point, they find all of this. Well, this guy actually developed a conscience and went and admitted that it was him. And so it's interesting to watch how they evolve and to realize that by coming together as a group and functioning as some kind of a model, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a democracy, but, functioning as members of a group, that everybody benefits.
Right.
And that if one person screws it up, they screw it up for everybody.
Right. Well, one of the words that Sheriff Higgins used was community. Right. This is your community, and over time, that's what it became. And I just found it very interesting. Angela, you watched the show. What were your takeaways from it?
Along the same line as Regina, I really didn't know what to expect when I started watching it, and I actually want to rewatch it because it was kind of a hurried thing today, but I really enjoyed it because, and yes, there are people out there who do very horrible things, and these guys are there for a reason. However, like she said, at some point, if they're not in prison for life, then, they're going to have to be reintegrated into society. And I know from hearing many, many stories, getting out of prison, you become institutionalized and you don't know how. I mean, Shawshank Redemption was a great movie for that. It showed, the effects of being in a prison for that amount of time. I don't know, like she said, it's a two-edged sword because they're there for punishment, especially like some of the stories that we've done, and they're horrible, 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 unspeakable things that they've done. But then there's the other ones who maybe they're not so bad. So I did find it really interesting, and I thought it was really cool. So
I did too. Thank you. So what about you, Christine?
All right. So, yes, I agree with the model of letting them integrate within their own communities, which are communities of convicts in these pod cells, and for them to learn how to communicate and get along in those communities in order to eventually, hopefully, develop themselves in self-awareness due to the awareness of how their actions affect everyone around them, therefore affecting them. That's essentially what the experiment kind of shows, ultimately, but I'm not sure if it's enough.
Well, it's definitely not enough in the sense that if they don't have counseling and, training, education so that they can get jobs on the outside. But this was something that, A, didn't really cost any money to the facility, okay? And B, helped them sort of become group counselors for each other. I mean, there were a couple of guys in that show, one in particular, the guy that can't remember what his name was, but he was talking about how he was always the smallest guy, was always fighting with everybody when he was a kid. And he had been trying to, pardon?
Tiny.
Yes, and he had been trying to reach his son, and just the entire change, not just in his demeanor, but in his behavior, in his empathy for others. And all of that was just isolation and deprivation are forms of torture. You know, if you leave somebody locked up 23 hours a day, if they weren't crazy to start with, they're going to be.
Right. And it also stunts development, mental development, emotional development, development of humanity skills. There's a high rate of the revolving door effect of prisoners, especially in county jails when they're not necessarily capital crimes, but larceny crimes and things of that nature, and the nature of drug addicts to break the law, to end them up in county jails over and over and over again. The thing is that the first time an offender offends and gets sent to jail, if they keep going back, and this is the life that they live for 10 to 20 to 30 years, they essentially get stunted at that first time that they went to prison or jail. And they never grow. They never become self-aware. And if they're not self-aware enough to know that they have to look outside themselves to become aware of how they impact everything around them, they never develop anywhere. So this experiment is great, and I hope it spreads throughout all of our systems in America, because it will teach them how to communicate and develop their minds and their emotions. Like Regina said, they start becoming, counselors to each other, just like all humanity should do.
Agreed.
But my thing is then what? So that's why I say it's not enough.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately,
Because
go
that's
ahead.
kind of like the blind leading the blind.
Well, that's
I'm
true.
glad that they can, obviously, they are best at speaking with one another about their circumstances, because everybody that's there has been in that circumstance, just varying degrees of those. So they do have that common bond, but that's a trauma bond. So I was excited to see at least that their behavior started to become more communal, and that they started to kind of look out for each other. I feel like, I wonder, and what we were discussing when we were watching it was, what if we took the ones that were 18 to 23, let's say, and we kept them away from the older population so that they didn't have time to learn any new bad behaviors, and gave them sort of like training and stuff like that. And then separately over here where the older ones are, they're still getting training too, or help them with, I don't know. I feel like maybe you can circumvent
Some of the problems that they had.
some of the problems.
But the problems that they had, they needed to be able to see their way through them. If you divided them up into classes or age structures or race or anything like that, that is ridiculous. Because if you don't see all possibilities of something, you really don't see any of it.
But I'm saying the age gap between some of these newer ones that are coming in, they are living on a completely different level that these older gentlemen really have no idea about, because they haven't even lived outside of that system long enough to know what these kids are dealing with these days.
Exactly.
So it's a completely different mental thing. I'm just saying, if we can get them when they are first coming in, when they're first starting to make these bad choices, and we segregate them from the other general population of criminals that are in there.
No, it would do them no good. It would keep them stuck in that cycle of that thinking without any outside knowledge. It was actually very good. Like, everything happens for you, not to you. And yes, all of them thought at first that everything was happening to them.
Right. And notice what happened when the older inmates did take a step back.
Well, so
True story, decided that, oh, you know what? You got this? Okay. I'm going to quit putting myself out there. I'm going to quit trying to step up. Then people aren't getting fed.
Right.
The juveniles aren't getting their trays, because there does need to be a leader, even if, and the leader's always going to take the heat, I guess. But the kids did end up admitting that they learned from the older inmates. It's just a matter of letting them find that balance And I don't think that they realize how much each individual in that small of a community, how much each individual person's behavior trickles down and affects everyone else.
Right. And so I'm just going to back up. I just want to back up a couple of steps so that our listeners understand the point that you just made, Regina. So after the sheriff said, okay, this is how we're doing it, and they were all like, okay, is this for real? So then True Story, which, right, all these guys have their nicknames. So True Story is an older fella who's been in there he's been in and out of the system, institutionalized his entire life since he was, they called them juveniles, the 19-year-old in the early 20s. And so he stepped up right away, trying to implement organization and leadership. And the juveniles and some of the other people were like, well, who the hell is this guy? Who does he think he is? This and that. And that's when he stepped back. So I think that's important. And so then when True Story stepped back, shit kind of went sideways a little bit, right? And then the sheriff comes back in. He's like, yo, guys, like, this and that and whatever. Let's. And then that's when they found the hooch, which to me looked like straight up vomit in a bag. And they were drinking it. It was so disgusting. And so he gave them another chance. And then so a little more time goes on, and then he gave them more privileges. And I think that was a really cool thing that he did. So they posted up what your privileges are. Well, your privileges are as many free calls as you want. And so I thought that was a turn, because it allowed, like the guy that you were talking about, Regina, Tiny, the little guy who was, I think he was a crit, right? And he hadn't seen his son in years, and it allowed him to connect with his son. And to just see this guy light up, like the hardness went away when the son actually came. Because when he was waiting for his son, I thought, oh my God, please let him show, please let him show. And he did. And, this tiny guy he just melted. He looked so happy. And this big smile on his face. And, it was just the little things, the respect that they were given, and to figure it all out, and to figure out, well, who's going to be responsible for making sure everybody in here gets something to eat, and who's going to be responsible for reaching out to the juveniles. And I don't know if counseling is the right word. Maybe it's the right word. And then at the end, I completely was teary about it. Hon, I missed you. What were your thoughts? What was your biggest takeaway from the show?
Well, I thought it was really cool to see the transformation happen with these guys. More so for others than some. But like Regina had brought up with Eastside, developing a conscience and being concerned about the rest of the group being punished for his mistake. For him to step up to plate, that was a big deal. The guy AJ, who really was just kind of a wallflower the whole time he was in. He just kind of stayed back to himself and didn't really talk to anybody. He didn't get himself into trouble, but he didn't communicate with anybody. And that was one of the things that I think he gained through the whole experience, because not only did he want to seek more help for himself, but when he got out, he wanted to help other people. And I thought that was really cool. They showed a little clip of him at the end, and he clearly looked happier and healthier and was on the right path. The only thing I didn't really like about the program, now the program wasn't perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. But the one thing that I knew was a bad idea right away was when they introduced the new inmates towards the end of this experimental program. I knew it was going to be a bad idea. But on that same note, it pushed those inmates to the next level that they needed to be at, to be able to step back and to communicate and work together, even if you never met this person before. Right. Because in the real world, that's how it happens. You have to deal with people on a daily basis that you've never met before, and they're probably going to piss you off. You can't just go around beating up people that piss you off. That's not how society works. So it was a great lesson. Kind of a scary thing, though, because that guy could have got seriously injured and potentially killed.
Right, but that's what they were used to. I mean, that's what he was used to from before, right? But I think, the sheriff did admit, too, that they realized they had to be a little more careful about selection of prisoners that they were going to integrate into one of these open pods like that. But the inmates also got together after that when they were waiting to find out whether the program was going to be shut down or not. And they came up with a plan, which was incredible, to say, okay, well, when new people show up, because this is a prison, that's how it works. People come, people go. We're going to sit them down with a mentor, and they're going to get an orientation, and we're going to let them know what the expectations are, and that, because we like having these freedoms as much as we can have in a jail environment.
Right. The older guys would say is they were craving and they were thriving from organization that they developed, and the communication. It was like, as the experiment went on, it was like everybody just kind of relaxed. They were like, okay, so this is how it's going to go. Hey, we have our freedom to be out. Like, they could go out of the pod, but it was still within the pod, but it was kind of like outdoors, but there were 4 walls, really high walls. I think it even had a ceiling in it. Maybe some skylights, I just don't remember, but where they could play basketball.
That's the rec area that they would get the 1 hour in before where the basketball court was.
Right. Right. And it was like they'd take their chairs out and they would sit and talk to one another, and they started opening up about their life. And I think, Todd, you brought it up. AJ is the guy that had the head tattoo, the guy who did meth and this and that. And like, as time went on, he was like, I don't want this. And this is like the first time I've really been sober and I'm thinking clearly. And I just thought it was amazing. And when he did get out, he left Arkansas, went down to Florida, got into a rehab, did his time down there. So he's really sticking with the program. And I believe he did start, or he was going to start mentoring people, wasn't he?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Tiny got out. And, so you got to see him when he's out and he's just talking. And like, one of the things he just kept saying is, I'm happy. And then the other thing, after I finished the final episode last night, I was looking on Netflix and I found another show that I started watching before I fell asleep, but it was called 60 Days In. Did you guys run across that one at all?
I've seen that one where they basically plant people in the jail to pretend to be prisoners so that they can get intel on what's going on inside the jail.
Right.
And the first there were several seasons of that. And one of the first 2 or 3 was, the first couple were okay. And then it got to where there were people that really, really crossed the line that they put in there. Shit got real. It was crazy.
Yeah, the first episode that I watched, now I don't know who they put in before, but these were all people who had been in prison before. There was a woman who had been in prison for 8 years, bad checks, fraud, this, that, and the other thing. I can't remember what some of the other guys had done, but when this woman, and both of them were like, I've done time, I've got this is no big deal. So with this particular episode, I don't know if he's a warden. I don't know if he's also a sheriff. I don't know how all that works. But he's like, we need to know what's going on. We think there's a lot of contraband. We think there's drugs. We think there's weapons. And so they gave him like, okay, if you guys need to get out, you need to rub your temples and say you've got the worst headache or a massive headache. That's our key. That's our code. And so they're like, I'm never going to say the code. Well, within 24 hours, 2 of the people were rubbing their head like, I've got a massive headache, I've got a headache, and they got him out of there. So this is what I saw. So the woman who went into the women's prison or jail, they're doing 23-and-1s there too. Now this may be across the board, I don't know, but 23 hours in a small cell. You have, like, this particular girl was bunked up with another woman, and I'm not telling you my nerves were shot as well, because they are legit cage doors. You know what I mean? Like they're pen doors, where the show that we watched on Unlocked, they're solid doors. But these were caged, penned doors. They're climbing on them, kicking them, screaming all day, all night. And it made me start thinking about, the first show that we watched, Unlocked, where same thing. And if you're going stir crazy and you're angry and you're doing nothing but getting more angry, and as soon as you get out, well, it's balls to the wall, I'm going to beat your ass and fuck you and this, and you know what I mean? Like, they're wild animals. They're like caged animals. And I will admit, like, when I think about, granted, on the shows that we do, like, they're murdering, but not all of these people are murdering people. It might be armed robbery. They didn't kill anybody. It might be writing bad checks. It might be whatever it is. And it's just the mentality that's happening when you're locked in a cell for 23 hours a day. You're completely dehumanized. And so in the Unlocked show, watching the dehumanizing change to where they're becoming more human, where it's okay to talk, where it's okay to have feelings, where it's okay to have structure. And they thrived off of it and the communication, and it made them want to do better, be better. Even the hard kids, the juvenile kids, they were softening up, and it was changing their outlook on life. I don't know. There's just the possibilities to me. I'm very hopeful, because if this is how our prisons are run and all of our jails are run, it's the wrong way to go, because of course they're going to be angry all the time. And when they get out, they're going to do the same shit. They're going to bounce right back into doing whatever they were doing, instead of saying, hey, I had a taste of community where it wasn't my gang. You know what I mean? Like, we're family and this and that. And if you try to get out, we're going to kill you. In fact, AJ, the guy you were talking about, hon, that's what happened to him.
Yeah.
Right? He wanted to finally get out of the life, and it was his friends, the ones he grew up with, that tried to kill him.
Yeah, that's not uncommon in gang lifestyle, that it's blood in, blood out.
Yeah.
You kill to get in, and you have to die to get out. Yeah, to that point, I think a lot of, in particular, county jails are on that 23-in-1 cycle, and a lot of it has to do with prison overcrowding and being understaffed. And then that's the problem, because when you think about it, if you're understaffed and you're working in an unsafe environment, right, then your number one priority is going to be to protect the officers, and also to try to cut down on violence or ensure that the prisoners don't have the ability to harm each other as much as possible, right? You can't be everywhere at once. So the only way to do that is to keep your foot on their neck. And when you do that, it reinforces that mentality on the prisoner's part, that this is something that's happening to them, that this is not something they have any control over, that they're being punished for, no reason, or for the wrong reason, that somebody's always just out to get them, instead of, okay, now you're free in the pod to operate as a community and to be accountable for your own actions. And they started to realize that the repercussions were directly a result of their actions, and not just the man's picking on me, the guards are picking on me, this other inmate's picking on me. I can't control what they do, but I can control me. I see this guy over here that looks like he's about to go off. Maybe we should go talk to him before he blows up and ruins this for everybody. It was just really crazy to me watching all of that, because, intellectually and as a clinician, I know that it's possible. It was a whole different thing watching it play out.
Totally understandable. Like you were both saying, when they're doing 23-in-1s, and as Regina said, that is the common practice. Like I was saying, they don't have any time to process any emotions or thoughts, really. They just get stunted and stuck in that selfish state of being, So, like you said, Tracy, they're like caged animals, because they're always trying to assert themselves in whatever it is that's happening in their life. But when you give them a little bit more freedom, you give them a little bit more communication, you give them outlets to be able to process their thoughts and feelings, then you do humanize them a little bit more. And then they can flourish in these micro societies, these microcosms of life, and they can develop and learn. It is a great thing, but it is also a tricky thing because our system has been broke for so long. We have created so many of those caged animals that it begs the question, is it too little too late? What do we do with all the ones that have been in there forever, you know?
Yeah, well, let's take True Story, for example, right? So he'd been in and out of the prison since, what was he? I think he was like 49 years old during the show, and this was filmed in 2023. And like he'd be in prison or jail and he'd get out, he'd reoffend, he'd come back, boom, boom, boom. It just kept going on. And I think, I don't know how much longer. I don't know. Maybe he was spending the rest of his life in there at that point. I have no idea.
He's not in there for life. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in the county. However, True Story is actually not one of the many, because True Story was one of the few that had outside jobs. So he did communicate and collaborate with other members of the jail and the COs more often than all the other 23-and-1s. He was out doing jobs.
Right.
Right. He was a trustee. He volunteered for the hard jobs because it got him out of the cell. It is one of the reasons why he went around to the inmates that had been there longer, trying to sort of recruit people that he thought would have influence and could help kind of create a little bit of structure, because they do, you know, even one of the kids had said later on that, yeah, they realized that as much as they resented it, they still needed some structure. It was funny to me at first because he was going around, well, actually what was funny is at first when the sheriff explained what the experiment was going to entail, did anybody else notice, looking around the room, how many of those inmates actually looked scared shitless?
Yeah.
Like, some of them even commented about sleeping with their door unlocked and opened and being afraid that somebody would come in and attack them in the middle of the night.
Yep.
I think that I wouldn't be losing any money if I bet a whole bunch of money on the fact that 98% of those fuckers in there were scared shitless.
Mm-hmm. But when
right, they're looking around the room going, all right, who did I piss off badly enough that they're going to come shake me?
Right?
You know?
And you know what else I found, like every time it happened, I had a total butt pucker, is, you know, they had Miss D. So she was an older woman, an older female. Were they all sheriffs? All of them?
Well, she was a guard.
She was a guard, Miss D. They respected her because I'm like, oh my God, you got a woman. And then there was a younger female guard. I thought she was very beautiful. And she walks up in there all by herself. I'm like, oh my God. I swear to God, I thought that something was going to happen, right? You got a beautiful young female guard walking in there, and every single one of those inmates completely respected those women. Now, granted, one of them was, you know, I think called her a bitch or something like that, but you know, the other, you know, she got right back on him. You talk to me with respect, and the other guys in there did not like that. And I was like, well, that's cool, because I just got nervous. I was just thinking, oh my God, they're going to get this young girl. But that never happened. Now, I don't know if I'm just being stereotypical, but it was like legit every time.
I noticed that too. They were very careful to keep their distance and let her do what she needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then she got out of there, and then they all went up to read whatever she had posted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of that has to do with her and how she carried herself. I mean, I don't know about you, Tracy or Christine, but I worked in the county hospital in the ER, and we frequently had what we referred to lovingly as guests of the state that would come in for treatment in the ER, and a lot of them were, you know, convicted felons, very bad guys from a societal standpoint. And they would get rowdy. They would push back. They would try to intimidate. But a lot of that had to do with whether or not they felt that you were receptive to it or that you were intimidated.
Right.
And so you have to kind of, in that situation, you have to find the balance between treating them with some dignity and respect and also standing your ground, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And also, you guys got to keep in mind that, I mean, jail wasn't a new concept to them before all of this. And that even when they were in the pod, when the officers would be in the pod, yes, all of the doors wouldn't be open at the same time, but there are rules about getting too close to a CO, a corrections officer. Like, there are rules to that. So they were still following the rules. And if you notice, she would have her right hand on her hip, and on that hip was some pepper spray. And if they got within so many feet, I don't know exactly, and I don't know if all prisons use the same area of footage around the officers, but if they were to encroach on her space, she was ready and willing to spray them, and they knew that, I'm sure.
I don't think I caught that, Christine.
I mean, they didn't point it out, but that's I don't know. I guess I just seen a CO or two into my time. Those are the rules, and that is how they carry themselves. Like, they have one hand on their weapon at almost all times. And in this, I think actually in one of the episodes, when she was going after him, telling her to treat her respect, she said, I'll spray your ass or something like that.
Oh, I missed that.
She said something about spraying him.
Yeah, I did remember that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Miss D. Yeah, they were like, that Miss D, she can smell the hooch.
I don't know how you could miss it because it has to reek. It has to be awful.
Well, let's think about it. I mean, it's fruit, sugar.
It's fruit, sugar, and bread.
And Kool-Aid.
Bread crust and Kool-Aid and water. And, yeah.
Legit, it looked like
they just let it sit until it ferments, basically rots.
Yeah,
it's trash can punch. That's what it is. It's disgusting. And I mean, have you ever left an orange or something, it gets dropped in your car or something, and all of a sudden you're like, what is that smell? And it's like that sweet kind of
acetone. Yeah, gross.
Yeah.
Gross.
I mean, you'd have to be able to smell that from 500 paces.
Right, no matter how much you twist that up in the garbage bag.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like weed. I don't care what you put it in. You can still smell it. Either that or, it's like, did somebody run over a skunk or what's going on?
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. And I hope there's a follow-up to this Unlocked series. Because at the end, I mean, they were all at risk for losing it all. Like, the sheriff was very disappointed, and that's, and that's something that one of them had said too, is that, when the sheriff walked in there, he wasn't mad, he wasn't yelling, he was very composed. It was the look of disappointment, and several of them said that it's like disappointing your mother, and they were on the brink of losing it all and going back to 23-1. He's like, if you want this, you have to tell me, show me why. And after he left, they got out their paper and pencils. They were all sitting around like, let's get this done, guys. Let's get this written down. We need to present this to him tomorrow. And they did. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's not going to let him. And you could my heart was sinking for these guys because I was watching them change. I mean, some of them may never change for good, but at least for that moment, there was a change. And they were talking to one another. They were walking around hugging each other, not face-to-face hug, but, some guys would put their arms around the other guys and just give them a little snug. And then, you know what I mean? So, and who knows if that is even a thing outside of, or any experience they've ever had at home or with their gang people. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know. But I was just impressed. And the cool thing is at the end is that the sheriff had said that he's going to keep doing this experiment and moving on. I think he said he was going to do it he had 4 other pods in mind.
Yeah.
I think at the end they did say that he pushed it to more pods. I vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
I think it was in writing on right before the credits.
Right. So I want to give some big ass props to Sheriff Eric Higgins, and I hope you keep doing it because it was working. I mean, granted, there were bumps in the road, there was shit that happened, like there were fights that happened, but they pushed it in a cell and shut their door, and they commenced beating each other's ass, but that got squashed. So I'm
that
hopeful.
dude was the one egging it on himself. He was adamant that there was going to be a fight.
Yeah.
But, the other thing that's incredible, and you really do have to give this sheriff a lot of credit, is that his job was on the line behind it.
Yeah, it was.
There were times that he really could have said, you know what, done. I can't. His reputation and his livelihood were risked on a social experiment involving felons.
Yeah.
That takes some balls. I don't care who you are. I mean, that genuinely takes some grit to not freak out and shut it down on the first hint of trouble.
Well,
okay, I tried it, didn't work. Let's go back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think as a warden, he has a lot of expectations of, well, that can happen. I'm sure he's been through some stuff, you know what I'm saying? So
right.
He's seen the worst of the worst. And I imagine he had some imagination that bad things could happen, but really, I mean, nobody died, so I feel like it was a win for him.
Well, and he actually said that even despite the hiccups that they had, that pod had fewer problems than the majority of the pods in the rest of in the jail.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with when you have people that have nothing better to do than to figure out how to try to get over, you have problems. And when you give them time to do other things and you give them other diversions, to talk to their family, to go outside, to just play a game of cards, whatever it is, then they have less time to focus on doing the bullshit.
Yeah, they're less selfishly preoccupied.
I was just thinking, now you build upon it, right? So some of those juveniles that were in there, they moved out because it was kind of cool. Like at the end, they kind of told you, like, this guy, because there was the one guy who did kill somebody, and he ended up going to trial, and then he's off to prison for I think he was serving 20 years or 30 years or something like that. But so once you get each pod to the point where they've developed their community, now maybe start offering having a counselor come in, bring them in books, things that, because they're getting their brain into the right headspace, give them things that they can now help develop and build on so that, and when they do get out, help them like, hey, do you want to get away from this place? Like maybe we can, set you up with someone in this state, get out of this state altogether. I mean, the possibilities really, to me, are endless once you've got this open pod community established, so that once they do get out, they've got the tools to change, to move, to continue to better themselves. I don't know. I'm really hopeful.
But I think that the most invaluable tool is the ability to become aware of themselves and their effect on others. And it's almost like they build that critical thinking skill that they didn't have before they got there. So that critical thinking skill allows them to use rationale to get to a better decision.
Yeah.
So I'm all for it. I just feel like
there's definitely a lot more that needs to be done.
Yeah.
This is a positive peer pressure situation where like, hey, if you fuck this shit up for me, I'm going to beat your ass where nobody can see you in your cell. And you know what? People straightened up right quick. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and Christine, you've talked a couple of times too about the whole being stunted, right? People's emotional development.
Yeah.
And their social development being stunted at the point that they enter the system. And when you think about it, it's very much the same as the addiction cycle. And that's what gets a lot of people into the system in the first place. But, you know, when you think about it, when a person is in recovery, having experienced this with a former partner, and they get out of rehab and they're like, you know, their social and emotional development is stunted at about whatever developmental age they become addicts, because, you know, you're just, your brain and your body are so consumed with the drugs that nothing else really has time to develop. And it got me thinking about, there was an experiment about, you know, like mice, and it was talking about trying to determine the causes of addiction, right? Is it a genetic thing? Is it, you know, a self-control thing or whatever? And they were pointing out the original experiments with mice where they introduced water that was laced with drugs into the rat's cage, and in a few, you know, within a few days or weeks or whatever, the mice or the rats or whatever they were experimenting on would ignore food, ignore everything else to go to the drug water dish. But then another scientist said, well, but that's because these mice don't have anything else in this cage to interact with. There are no other mice. There are no activities for them to do. So he built, like, you know, a mousy amusement park basically, and put all these mice into there and tried the same experiment. And you know what? They didn't have the problems with the mice going to the drugged water at inappropriate increments, because it's not a failure of a person's self-control, and it's not a genetic thing necessarily. I mean, yes, there are predispositions to it, but what it is lack of engagement in your surroundings that leads to an addiction cycle that is almost impossible to break. Isolation does that.
Incarceration is the same thing as being stuck in addiction.
Exactly.
Where that person is entrapped in a selfish stage, a selfish state of being where they only go after what they can focus on. It's like with everything else in life. You're going to get what you focus on. But 23-and-1 people, that they're in a cage for 23 hours a day, that 1 hour that they're out, they want to rage so hard because all they could think about is being in that cage for 23 hours.
Yeah, they're pissed.
You know what I mean? The drug-addicted person, if they don't get the drug for 23 hours, just using the 23-and-1, all they're going to do for that 1 hour is chase the drug. Do you know what I mean? It's because they get stuck in that selfish state of being that they're not actually self-aware at all. They only know what they know, and they're only knowing what they're focused on because they're forced to focus on that.
Yep.
When you do let them communicate the interaction piece of everything, they then become aware of outside of themselves, which then enables them to look inward and become better and get unstuck, to develop. It allows them to develop. Without that interaction, without that break in focus, they're never going to develop. They're never going to grow. They're never going to learn, emotionally or mentally, or even physically.
Right. And just like Todd said, I think that guy's name was Eastside, the one who was doing the tattoos for people and making hooch and doing all this kind of stuff. The guy who turned himself in because they were like, all right, everybody's going to take a vote. Well, nobody's going to rat anybody out. Like, that's just, that is never going to happen. And, you know, so he's finally like turning himself in. He turned himself in for the community that they had. Like, I've got to do the right thing here. So he did it, and then they let him stay because he admitted what he did. And, you know, he's like, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then his roommate, like, I don't know how many days later or whatever, but he's like, hey man, like, you know, how come you're not making hooch anymore? And he completely softened up and he changed. And he was like, basically, he didn't want to do that anymore. He didn't want to put anyone in jeopardy. He, just like you said just now, Christine, he stopped being selfish and he started thinking about others, the other people in his community in that pod. And he had even said the only reason that he was doing the drugs was to get by, to numb his mind, to get through being in prison, in jail.
Yeah, because he was stuck. He was stuck on the focus.
Mm-hmm.
The addiction, not knowing any better, not being aware of the outside of himself. So yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just have to lighten the mood for a second, because when you were talking about somebody being locked up 23 hours a day and then they're focused on that 1 hour a day that they want to rage because they've had nothing else to think about. That's like me when I'm on a diet. Like all I can think about is when am I going to eat and what am I going to eat? And honestly, I don't diet all that often, but it's like being NPO for some kind of medical procedure or a test. It's like I hardly ever eat breakfast, but if you tell me that I can't, all I can think about is when can I eat? When am I going to eat? I'm really hungry.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
That's the tricky thing about never focusing on your own shit. Always focus on how you can make everything around you better, and you'll always be better off.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Unless I'm really hungry, because at some point, I mean, Tracy and I both, we get a little bit,
bitchy.
what's the word, Todd? Todd
Hangry.
described it best.
Hangry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere towards hungry rage more than hangry. I mean, if I tell you I'm hungry, you've got, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes max.
Okay, but now that we're getting on the lighter side of things and I can get off of my soapbox about how I was like, yeah, duh, the whole time I was watching that, I just want to say, I think, Tracy, you mentioned him before. There was one kid that, like, they talk about him at the end. He was periodically in it, but never, like, one of the main people they focused on. He looked evil. He looked crazy as all crazy can get out. He was in there for capital offense. Because at one point, he's one of the kids that says, yeah, I'm in for a cap.
Yeah.
Like, that was his line.
Mm-hmm.
And then they show, like, a snapshot of him afterwards, how he's serving life somewhere because it was a capital offense. But he was the only one that I saw on camera that I was like, ooh, that fuck is evil.
Yeah,
You're talking about that big kid that came in.
No, he wasn't even that big. He was like a little white kid.
He was the red-haired dude that was. He was a red-haired white guy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Miller dude
kind of
looked
like
pretty
Tushy.
evil.
Mm-hmm. Wait, who was pretty, Angela?
A little like
the Miller dude in the beginning who was poking and prodding everybody and starting shit. He had crazy eyes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He looked little. He made a deal with the devil type. I agree.
Yeah. For
he
sure.
made a deal with the devil, but that other kid, he might have been like the devil's cousin or something.
Second, third cousin. Yep. Well, I'm so happy that you suggested that we all watch this, Regina. I definitely learned a lot, and it made me hopeful, because if other countries are doing this and they don't have the recidivism that we do, I mean, yeah, they committed the crime, but they're still human. You know, some people there's no hope for, but I think for some there is hope. And I'm hanging on to that. Some are just in it forever.
Some of these guys are going to be back in society at some point. So you really, really kind of want them to learn how to behave in a community before they're moving in down the street, you know?
Agreed.
It makes sense. So thank you again, Regina. And you know what? I'm kind of down for us watching more documentaries, or, you know, just whatevs. Any show. It's good conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and happy birthday, Nina.
Happy birthday, Nina.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
We've been celebrating since Friday, so I'm a little tired today.
Wow. Lisa's special.
And we will not ask for details.
No.
Well, I'm glad you had a great birthday weekend. And you know what? A birthday should be celebrated for a few days in a row.
Yeah, well, when your birthday's on a Monday, it's kind of not there. Like, who wants to have a birthday on a Monday?
Yeah.
So you got to always weekend before.
It's like our Halloween conversation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All birthdays should be on Saturdays.
All birthdays.
They should all be celebrated on Saturdays. Just every Saturday, we'll just have a massive party for whoever's birthday it is.
Everybody's birthday on Saturday.
Yep,
Mhm.
that's right. All right. Well, that was a great show, you guys. Thank you so much. I love the show. So I'm glad we did it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back and listening. Have a great week, and we will see you back on F-Bomb Friday. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.